Welcome back. I'm Brandon, the HBAR Bull, and I'm joined by Zepzi. We both do some work for the HBAR Foundation, but we aren't here today in any official capacity. We're just here to go over some of the topics for the town hall and give you our insights. Welcome, Zep.
How's it going, Brandon?
It's going great. I had fun listening to the town hall, and I know that you had some thoughts you wanted to put out there, so we'll jump right into it.
For sure.
All right. So the first question was, how do you feel about the current market conditions and how is Hedera performing? Now, these clips that I'm going to put on here are just going to be short clips. It might not even be the full response. So, I suggest to everybody to go back and take a look at the whole town hall to make sure that they have the full context. But for this first one, talking about Hedera market conditions, Scott Teal of DLA Piper answered, and this was his response.
So from a Hedera perspective, what I'm seeing is increased adoption of what I would call mission critical high value use cases. They are typically slower to incubate. They're slower to test. They're slower to adopt. But if you want to change, the world, there tends to be a lead time in doing that, and that's kind of the journey we've been on. What we're seeing with Hedera is the adoption of the Hedera protocol based on some of the fundamental sort of technology attributes of that protocol. And so that steady growth in the number of interesting and mission critical applications is definitely happening. Not to be outdone with the industry loving an acronym, I've been creating my own, and it's called TVR. And we've heard others. Brett was just talking about TPS. We've seen a lot of talk about TVL in the context of DeFi and locked crypto and locked assets on protocols. To me, I think what we're going to see is when it comes to large scale, high value assets and mission critical projects running on a particular protocol, the question is which one do they trust? And so TVR, total value represented, the total value of things, assets, whether they're real world or investment products or whatever they might be, when people start to trust, substantial portions of the world's GDP to a particular blockchain, which one are they going to use? And so I think TVR, the total value represented, is going to be an important one. And it's obviously something, and I'll come on to it one of the later questions. It's something that we've been working towards around the Toko project as well, with putting high value things on a protocol.
All right. So, Zep, he talked about something that I hadn't heard before. He said he made up the term. It was total value represented. Obviously, he wants analysts to take a look at Hedera and use this as a metric. And it's not surprising because Toko is going to be tokenizing securities. And he obviously feels like there's going to be a lot of value represented on the Hedera network. And he wants Hedera to be judged based off of that. There's a couple things. We went back last week. I interviewed Arca, and Mihal talked about how they value layer one networks, and he talked about doing it like a company, just taking a look at the fee revenue that's generated. And I think in years to come, Hedera will shine in that space. And he also looked at it as just the infrastructure that's built around these networks. Well, what Scott talked about here is something new, right? It's total value represented. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how much value we get represented, because that shows the amount of trust there is in a network. Do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of represents, the maturity of the market, I suppose. It's like up until now, we've had TPS, i.e. transactions per second, and TVL, i.e. total value locked. And these are two metrics that are, they're great metrics for the current state of the markets. Like with DeFi applications, which is probably the biggest application at the moment within sort of the DLT sphere that's, active and well adopted. And TVL works perfectly for that. You can see how much a chain is doing in terms of DeFi, how much it's trusted, success of it. And with something like TPS, you can see, how many actual physical transactions are going through, how much fees are coming from each transaction, et cetera, et cetera. But like you said, we're with this TVR, total value represented, it's a new way of representing value on a chain altogether, because it only really makes sense so far for an application like Toko that we haven't really seen on any other chains before. Because, it's like, okay, if, for instance, Toko say they're, I think they said something about debt financing for a mining operation. and they tokenize these loans on the Hedera token servers. And these represent a huge amount of value that can't just be tracked through transaction to transaction, peer-to-peer transaction, or how much money is within a DeFi protocol or something like that. And then if, for instance, they've tokenized some real world assets like I don't know, some real estate in Hong Kong or something like that, or an amazing piece of artwork. It's like these kind of things, which are assets that are just they've got their digital representation on our ledger. These companies are trusting us to store this information, to store this data, to store these digital representations, and that in itself is a completely new, I suppose, use case and a sort of seismic shift in the way that companies will be trusting networks moving forwards. So yeah, it needs its own metric itself, and I think TVR is a great one there. And beyond that, we said, how do we feel about how Hedera is currently performing within these conditions, i.e. the bear market that we're currently seeing? And if we look beyond just like the price of the HBAR token itself, if we look at what's happening with the foundation, we look at what's happening with Hedera, the rate of grantees hasn't slowed down. We've seen one of our biggest grantees recently, probably bigger than the announcement of Ubisoft joining the governing council so far, was that Lethos, the AAA gaming studio created by PlayStation vets for The Last of Us, Days Gone, Uncharted, and that's happened within these market conditions. And we've got their sort of fervent support from their team, from Michael and the rest of the team at Lethos. We've also got Source Swap doing their second bug bounty. So we're obviously going to see, hopefully through their momentum, so much more TVL coming into the network. Hopefully there'll be a positive correlation there. And we've also, Avery Dennison have launched Atmo.io, integrated Hedera for the carbon emission trackings of billions of items. Yes, we haven't seen that reflected in the TPS yet, but we know the integrations happened, and we know that, well, we've been told in this council meeting that in July we can expect to see those metrics go up. So I think, despite the market conditions, it's looking good.
Yeah, so I mean, there's all kinds of metrics we can use to value these layer one networks. I mentioned a couple that are used by Arca. We have just the transaction volume, we have the accounts being created, and you can go down the line. But Hedera is excelling at all these different areas. There's some that we're lagging behind right now. We have transaction volume, but I think we're going to talk about Avery Dennison here a little bit later on. But they're making great strides and laying the groundwork for all different kinds of metrics to value these layer one networks. So to get on to the next one, kind of along the same lines, they were asked the question: all DLTs must have a path to financial self-sustainability. Does Hedera believe that it has a path to financial self-sustainability, and what is that path? And this was answered by Brett McDowell. He's pretty much runs the Hedera Governing Council. He facilitates it, and this is what he said.
So just answering the question on what makes the network sustainable, worked with some of my colleagues and came up with a model. So if you assume that the Hedera network, let's say, is 100 nodes at that time, and that all of the traffic coming in, the network fees that are being paid from the different services consumed, is kind of an even split between like HCS, which is a less expensive transaction, so less revenue, or HTS calls, which is a little bit more expensive, a little bit more revenue. Then it really comes down to around 300 transactions per second. So at 300 TPS, we're fairly comfortable that we've modeled it accurately, and that would cover 100 nodes running at today's specs, which are a little intense, right? So we have a high bar for our technical specifications of our nodes, also a high bar for the sustained throughput and bandwidth. So at all of those costs, that's the answer.
All right. So he says, the break even is 300 transactions per second. I do think he's talking about just the cost of running those 100 nodes that he was talking about. He's not talking about incentivizing the nodes beyond that. He's not talking about incentivizing token holders or doing a lot of things that the ecosystem is doing right now, building out infrastructure, making improvements to the network, things like that. So I do think that we need to see multiples of that 300 transactions per second, but it does give us kind of a baseline of what we need to achieve just to be self-sustainable running the nodes. Any thoughts?
So, I mean, 300 TPS is that golden number that he's come up with there. And like you said, that might not be for, anything more than just sort of paying, supporting that nodal network. It's not necessarily paying for upgrades and stuff like that. But, with privacy check, I remember you had this interview a while back now, and there was that sort of golden soundbite, which was sort of, I think there was a cautiously optimistic 3000 TPS expected. So that's a 10x on that 300 TPS. And if that, can come from one single use case, obviously we're yet to see it. But if that can be expected and forecasted from one use case alone, then I don't see how Hedera can't be turning over some serious revenue in the future. And
Sure.
then you've got, the coupon bureau with, the next digital standard for the next generation of digital coupons. I think it's 1.7 billion coupons are redeemed a year in the US. And, if we're assuming that all of those are on Hedera, which is a big assumption to make, obviously, but then we can also assume that, there'll be at least 2 transactions there, i.e. one for the creation, one for the redemption. And, that's probably, again, being sort of cautious there, I suppose.
Sure.
You'd expect there to be a lot more transactions than just those 2 per coupon.
Yeah.
So, if you take that figure, i.e. 1.7 billion, and just times that by 2, i.e. creation and redemption, that's 3.4 billion. So, and that's, again, all of those transactions going through Hedera, and that's, again, adding to that TPS figure.
Sure. So, I mean, we're going to have all these different use cases. Ads DAX, we've been pretty much a one-trick pony. We have a lot of small applications that are putting transactions on the network, but the big one was Ads DAX, and they've become more efficient. Market conditions have impacts on them, and our transaction count has gone down. But we have Avery Dennison coming, as you mentioned, Coupon Bureau, and privacy check, and on down the line. And as these get added, we're going to get into the thousands, and then we're going to have to lift up the throttle. We're going to have to add shards and so forth. So I think there's certainly bright days, but I did want to discuss that 300 transactions per second because I think that is just bare bones running the nodes themselves. So the next one that I wanted to touch on was actually they did this one right out of the gate. They talked about the maintenance windows, and here's what they said.
Leland, the first one is for you. What's progress on windows of downtime when upgrading the network?
Oh, well, it's 3 or 4 minutes. So the last one was 3 or 4 minutes. We've had several upgrades now that have been 3 or 4 minutes. So hopefully it will continue to be like that in the future, and maybe even get faster.
So the maintenance windows, at one time they would do it and it would be an hour or 2 hours. Now they have them scheduled and they're only a half an hour, but they're actually achieving getting the network back up in just a few minutes. And I've talked to some experts in the space, and they said almost all mission critical applications can work around that fairly easily. But they're going to actually make it even more efficient. They're going to get it back online even more quickly. Do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we go forward and, as the network matures and, as these enterprise grade applications start deploying, then we'll see, things like these update windows getting smaller and smaller and smaller because, that promise is already being met. I remember ages ago, like you just said, those update windows were a lot longer. And obviously, as we're getting closer to these deployments, as, AppMyO is coming online and stuff like that, we're seeing them, meeting these promises that were made in the past, that these windows will be reducing, these time windows will be reducing. And to me, that's just another promise that's being fulfilled and exciting to see.
Yep, exactly. So going back, another one of the topics they covered, we talked about Toko and the tokenization of securities. The question that was asked is, what is the status of Toko developments, and when will we see tokenized assets on the network? And this is how Scott responded.
We are already tokenizing assets. Sometimes they are confidential, and you don't necessarily see or hear about them. But one that we did put out a press release about that I'll just touch on, because I think it's an exciting kind of glimpse of the vision of the sort of future of finance piece. We worked on a debt financing project for a mining operation, and did a tokenized debt finance, so effectively representing that loan and the interest payments associated with that using a HDS token, with additional HDS tokens being paid as the interest on that loan. Now, one of the things that was interesting around that deal was it was actually a US-based owner or asset owner. The asset itself was in Eastern Europe. It was a calcium mining operation in Croatia. We used a Hong Kong private company to do the debt issuance, and the investors were globally based. Now, if you look at traditional capital raising type activities, they don't tend to look like that. But what the technology is beginning to enable is the ability to do that. Then what was then interesting, those tokens were minted and issued into a regulated virtual asset accounts with one of our custodian partners that we work very closely with, that's integrated into Toko. And we saw very rapidly, secondary market trading happening on a digital sort of OTC over the counter basis. Now, that's starting to look very much, it's one deal, and it hasn't got all of the moving pieces that we'll certainly see in the end, but it was indeed an end-to-end token issuance secondary market trading environment on a HTS token for a financial instrument linked to a real-world asset.
All right, so he pretty much said, we've already tokenized securities on the network, and he explained what that first one was as a proof of concept, but it's actually taking it to market. So again, Toko is not just, a pie in the sky idea. It's actually something that's been launched, and they're actually bringing things to market. So it's certainly exciting. Any thoughts on this one?
I mean, beyond, seeing that sort of TVR metric going up, I think that's what I'm most excited to see.
Yeah.
And obviously, DLA Piper are a big force behind Hedera. Scott is a big force behind Hedera.
Mm-hmm.
We've also seen them doing recent talks with ServiceNow. So that's, I'm very excited for the future of DLA Piper with Hedera, and also, this sort of mutual interaction between more than one governing council member. I think that's really cool to see as well. So yeah, very excited to see what comes up with DLA Piper.
Yeah, no question about that. So this next one was something that you weren't familiar with. There was something on Twitter about this a couple weeks ago. And the question was, is Hedera involved in any way in the FIDO Alliance? And this is what Brett had to say.
As you pointed out, I used to work at the FIDO Alliance. I was the founding executive director and chairman of the FIDO Alliance for a number of years in my career. Very proud and happy of the work that we've done there, and very keen to see some of their announcements just the past month or so. Google announcing Passkey, which is FIDO technology, in all of their platform devices, Android, and Apple announcing support for Passkey, which is FIDO, in all of their iOS and Mac platforms. What I'd point out is FIDO is using public key cryptography for authentication. That was it, interoperable public key cryptography. We had public key cryptography, wasn't interoperable, and also some deployment and metadata things. So, but it's really a Web 2.0 solution. So FIDO is really living in the Web 2 space. And yes, I have a connection with the folks that are still running the FIDO Alliance. I've been in touch with them recently, kind of exploring where they are. One of the things that happened back in 2015 is we spun up a blockchain study group to look at, was there a connection between FIDO and blockchain? And we've also back then looked at decentralized identity and the connection there, and making sure authentication used, FIDO keys instead of maybe ledger keys. That work is still untackled, largely untackled, is bringing those two worlds together. So right now, I would say the FIDO Alliance is still very much focused on getting out these Web 2 solutions and killing passwords in the Web 2 space and the mobile application space. But I think they're going to get their attention on Web 3. And when they do, I would expect Hedera to be a significant stakeholder in that collaboration.
All right. So I think Brett made it clear there, FIDO Alliance got a lot of attention because Apple and Microsoft are using them. And a lot of people assumed that, because Brett actually used to work with FIDO Alliance, that, there could be a connection with Hedera. But, Brett made it pretty clear here that, he still has connections with FIDO Alliance, and, there could be things that happen in the future. But, whatever integrations that Microsoft and Apple are making right now don't actually impact the Hedera network. So I thought that was good to clarify and make sure things stay transparent. All right, so the next question I wanted to cover is, what are your plans to recruit more council members and have more council member use cases actually on the network? And this is how they responded.
So I get it. I think that especially the people that might be attending this town hall, are kind of used to a lot of associating momentum of the project with increase of council members. And a lot of us kind of did, we associated that too before. So this time around, when I get the same question, I'm going to try to unpack that, bring some transparency into how people are thinking about it now on the council. So first of all, just a quick fact update. So the process of becoming a council member has changed. And now every new council member must basically be voted on twice. They have to be voted on by the membership committee, which is a nominating committee. And then they have to be finally approved by full vote of the council. And so what's happened is that membership committee is really trying to take the time that it takes. I mean, not deliberately go slowly, but to not rush getting their strategy together around who they want on the council. So I think it's more around who do we want to join us on this council? And sometime in the past, when we hit around maybe 21, 22, 23 council members, I would say that's when maybe the perspective of our members shifted a little bit away from conflating momentum of the project with momentum of the growth of the council. They really felt like they had adequate critical mass, and it was more about, okay, let's really focus on that new enterprise's use case. What is their use case? How are they going to use the network? And that does add time. It's not a sales cycle per se, but it's more, we want to make sure that you're going to be a user of the network as best we can before putting you on the council. And also looking for strategic connections, because it won't be long, if we kept the old pace up, it wouldn't be long before the council will be full. And now what are you going to do? You can't add more council. I've been in that situation. In previous organizations, they changed the bylaws so they could add more people because they got full. And then they changed the bylaws to add more people because they got full again. So I think what the membership committee is doing is wise, it's deliberate, and they're really trying to say, who do we want? And they're not rushing out to hit their quota.
So this was an interesting one, Zep. They made it clear that, they've kind of hit that critical mass of council members. They have, enough decentralization across industry, across jurisdiction, across geography, and they really don't need to expand for that reason. And they're really being a little bit more picky with who they bring on the council. They want people that are actually going to build on the network. They want, they don't want to get to that, 37 or 38 council members and have that 39 council member cap and not be able to bring on, who knows, an Amazon or a Tesla or an Apple or somebody like that. They want to make sure that they keep a little bit of room there to allow more council members to come on board. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's I think that what that really means for us is sort of the next time there is a governing council member, that's a big deal,
Mm-hmm.
Like if they're changing this stance from, sort of getting big thought leaders in, big companies within the industries we're in, and actually shifting to, the next ones that are coming in are going to be creating enterprise grade applications. That's just like a massive signal for retail in Hedera. And when you look at something like the most recent Ubisoft?
It was. It's been a little while.
Ubisoft was the most recent, and they came in. And I think that came through Alex, maybe from the foundation. So there was a mixed, a joint effort there. And, they came in and, obviously we haven't heard that much recently, but they came in with this plan, which was create the Ubisoft Hedera dedicated entrepreneurs lab. So like that shows to me like the start of that. a governing council member coming in, joining up, and announcing a use case at the same time. So I'm really excited if that's, if that's the new trend. Yeah, maybe the announcements will slow down, but the ones that are coming in are going to be driving real world adoption, real world adoption of DLT, mainstream adoption of DLT. Sorry, and that's just again gives more credibility to Hedera for sure.
Yeah, for sure. The way we were looking at it before, we were kind of judging the Hedera network based off of the council members that are being added. But, we're talking about all these other metrics that we can use now, whether it's total value represented, whether it's total value locked, whether it's the infrastructure that's being built, the fees that are being generated. And, we don't have to put as much focus on the council members. Of course, we already have a fantastic council. We don't have to, keep adding all the time. We just want to make sure that the ones that we do add are the right ones. All right, so shifting gears a little bit, we're going to get into a couple of the regulatory questions, and I know some of them are focused here in the US, so you might not be as familiar, but we'll just look at it as a general regulatory framework. And the first question I wanted to touch on is the US Senate recently outlined proposed broad regulations for crypto, which will result in most assets qualifying as commodities under the CFTC purview. Is Hedera confident under the Senate outlines that the HBAR token will not qualify as a regulated security? And this is what was said.
So I think this question is citing the Lummis-Gillibrand bill. And I would say that what I said earlier, we're engaged. We're engaging in the process. And we were engaged in the Lummis-Gillibrand bill. And we were very pleased with how open they were to our input. And in general, how collaborative they are. We're members of other trade associations like the Blockchain Association, Digital Chamber of Commerce. So there are lots of ways to collaborate with legislators as they try to figure out the best way to do this. So what I will say is that we're engaged. And it's something that I see our council members getting more and more value out of and getting more and more involved in. We also responded to a recent RFI from the Office of Science and Technology Policy around the climate impact of DLT. And in doing that, we were able to get a number of our ESG experts on the council to participate in that work group and do that collaboratively. So this is kind of a new thing. This is, or at least it's a milestone in how involved the council members are in this kind of activity. And we're going to continue to do more of this going forward. We think it's very important to engage in industry governance, not just our own network governance.
All right. So, of course, Hedera doesn't know as far as how HBAR is going to be viewed now and in the future as far as a security. But I think a lot of this comes from what's being drilled through in the courtroom of XRP. They're going through this process right now, and I think it seems like their case is fairly strong. The one thing that I do want to mention with this is a lot of the things that are coming, at least out of the US government, are fairly crypto friendly, whether it's the executive order that came out of the White House several months ago, or, this piece of legislation that's being debated right now. It seems like they're trying to foster crypto and the DLT space in general. They're not trying to stifle anything. They just want to make sure that it's properly regulated. And I think that making everything a security wouldn't kind of fall in that line. So I think that we're going to see some positive things come out of a government as far as that regulatory clarity that we're looking for. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like we've sort of done everything we can to work within a sort of elusive regulatory system that doesn't really exist yet. I feel like we've, it's been clear that Hedera have tried to do everything they can to try and predetermine probably more draconic regulations that might even happen. But we're deeply engaged with regulators, like they said on the town hall. We're a member of the Global Blockchain Business Council. We're a member of the Blockchain Association, which is, I think, one of the leading sort of lobbying firms at the heart of Capitol Hill. And and we did the SAFT, the SAFT, rather than the ICO. So I think there's a lot of boxes that we're ticking to be regulatory compliant in certain ways, and then I guess we'll have to wait and see about the whole security issue.
Yeah. That leads right into the next question that was asked, and that was if the regulatory authorities in the U.S. continue to dither or outright turn hostile against DLTs, would Hedera consider incorporating in a more progressive jurisdiction? Yeah, Zep. So that goes right into the next question, and it's if the regulatory authorities in the U.S. continue to dither or outright turn hostile against DLTs, would Hedera consider incorporating in a more progressive jurisdiction? And this was Brett's response.
This question has been raised by council members, and it is something that we have an eye on. Now, I'd point something else out. If you look at our council members, yes, Hedera Hashgraph LLC is a Delaware LLC, but the majority of council members, right? You'll see it on most of our web pages. You'll see us say, owned and operated by the council members. So that's Hedera. Hedera is owned and operated by the council members. The vast majority of those are not headquartered in the United States. So I can actually answer the second question even more clearly, like, if not, why not? I don't know why our council would have any sort of existential commitment to operating legally in the United States. I think that they're going to be looking at where is the best place to operate the network or components of the ecosystem, and take it from there. But what I will also say is that is not our approach, right? We are not looking for the exit. In quite the contrary, we are deeply engaging with US regulators and policymakers and the administration, or to try to help the US government. They are all trying to figure out how to best regulate this industry. And from the conversations I have, I feel that they in general are trying to support this industry. I know a lot of the headlines don't read that way, and I'm not speaking for everyone in DC who's grabbing those headlines, but in general, the people really doing the work, like the staffers that are writing the bills, they're trying to make this work for the industry while protecting consumers. So I think the best thing we can do is engage, be a source of valid, actionable metrics and data, so that they make the most informed decisions. And if that happens, well, then we don't have to worry too much about where we happen to be incorporated.
All right, so this goes back to your point that Hedera has, from the beginning, tried to be compliant and tried to work with the regulators. They had the choice in the very beginning of where to incorporate and where to set up their base of operations. And they chose to do it in the United States because they wanted to work with regulators. They didn't want to work against them. They didn't want to try to get outside their purview. They wanted to be smack dab in the middle of it, and they wanted to be part of the conversation of how regulation was going to work with DLT. One of the things that came up recently was a tweet from an aspiring politician. She's running for the Congress out of, I think it was Utah, but she asked about DLTs. And this was the tweet right here. It got good engagement. And then she followed up with this one, which just mentioned two cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and HBAR. So, of course, whenever we're talking about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin is going to come up. But it was interesting that she mentioned HBAR as well. Any thoughts?
I mean, I'd like to say pleasantly surprised. I don't know if I was surprised. I know we've been putting in all this effort at Capitol Hill, but to have that direct, I think, that direct engagement definitely surprised me. Of us just sort of, everyone knows about Bitcoin, that's, whenever I say, people ask me what I do, I say, oh, cryptocurrency, and they go, oh, Bitcoin. So everyone knows Bitcoin, but not really anything else.
Yeah.
And so for January, was that her name? January?
Yes.
I think her name was
January Walker,
January.
I think. Yeah.
So for her to write Bitcoin and HBAR and not tag a multitude of other projects, like a lot of people do to get that sort of engagement from.
Sure.
She targeted the HBAR community, and you could really focus on us there, Bitcoin and HBAR.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously she's picked us up from somewhere. Maybe she's seen our council members, or maybe she's seen, some of the stuff we've done in the past. I remember there was that sort of proof of concept kind of thing. I'm not sure if it got as far as a proof of concept, but a while ago they're floating that idea of blockchain voting or hashgraph voting, leveraging hashgraph for that use case. And yeah, I mean, obviously she knows about HBAR, she knows about Hedera, and to see that she's, you know, a congressional candidate for the US Congress, is running for that. I think that's very exciting, especially because she's considering herself as a blockchain friendly, crypto friendly candidate. For us to have her on our side, I'm sure will be great for us, definitely.
Sure, sure. I mean, as I said, she's just aspiring. She's just trying to get into the political world, but it's good to see that, you know, it was put right next to Bitcoin as far as HBAR. You know, I did when I was down in Consensus, I had one of the White House representatives came over and talked to us about it, and I introduced her to Mance. So it's just good that government is keeping an open mind about this, and I think it's going to, as I said, result in some good regulatory clarity that we're trying to strive for.
For sure.
All right, so the last one I wanted to touch on was, of course, Avery Dennison, and @MyO is a focus of everybody right now in the Hedera sphere. And the question was, Avery Dennison made an announcement of billions of transactions beginning in June, but since there has been less and less TPS on mainnet, why is this? And this is how it was responded to in the town hall.
I just had an update from Pradeep. He's one of the key sort of stakeholders in the HBAR IO project. So it's a very, very exciting project. Really, really looking forward to seeing it go live and start to ramp up. The answer to the question is there is an expectation of the transaction rate starting to increase over the course of July. I think that what the announcement was, I think around June. Again, enterprises are slow, checks, balances, slow to get going, but once they get going, they tend to have momentum. So there's an expectation that's going to be ramping up over the course of July and thereafter.
All right, so I know, you know, people see the transactions might have been drifting down in the recent months, and I think that comes down to ad stacks becoming more efficient, or, you know, market conditions, possibly customers not coming back online or something along those lines. But you talked about all the different things that are going to be added to the network that should get that TPS volume back up, and one of the big ones is going to be @MyO here. Now, they made it fairly clear that they're expecting it this month. Now we're a week into July, so I'm going to expect that Avery Dennison is going to start to put a fair amount of transactions on the network. So what are your thoughts around @MyO and Avery Dennison?
That'll probably be the best day of my life when those mainnet transactions start coming through, because, you know, that's just sort of, we can finally put all the FUD to bed. It's like,
that's right,
the exhaustion, the everyday exhaustion of dealing with comments and stuff like that on Twitter or whatever. You know, I think to finally have those transactions coming through, we know where they're coming from. We know they're coming from an enterprise grade application. It just puts it all to bed. And for me, yeah, it's gonna be a glorious day to be an HBARbarian.
Yeah. The FUD is exhausting. It comes out all the time. I know a lot of platforms deal with the same thing, but to have @MyO and Coupon Bureau and some of these other things actually come online and make us the clear-cut winner when it comes to transaction volume will say volumes. So, Zep, I know I kind of sprung this on you. You came out here. You were a good sport. I just wanted to chat about this town hall. Thank you so much for coming on, and I'm looking forward to the next town hall.
Thank you very much for having me, Brandon. I'll see you next time.